afternoon. This is Beth Maddie, President of the National Association of School Nurses. I'm so glad to have school nurses from around the country joining us today. The new school year brings new energy and a fresh start as we return to clean desks and happy students. But how do we keep this energy going when we feel our workload growing? How do we balance the needs of our students, our families, and ourselves? That's why I am so pleased that the first webinar of this school year will bring you information about developing resiliency, 6 powerful strategies for school nurses to thrive at work. Sharing their expertise today are our guest speakers, Dr. Lynn Schmidt and Dr. Kevin Nourse. Dr. Schmidt is the Director of Global Executive and Leadership Development. She is an executive coach and an author. Dr. Nourse is a leadership development consultant and coach. Kevin spent this past year working with the NASN staff and with the NASN Board of Directors. He is also a faculty member at Georgetown University. Welcome to Lynn and Kevin, and I'm looking forward to the information you will share with us to help us in our role. And now, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Beth. This is Lynn Schmidt, and good afternoon to everyone. And Beth did a great job of introducing us, and I really want to simply hone in on why I've focused on this topic and why it's important to me. I've spent all of my career in the corporate world working with both women and men on their leadership development, but have a particular interest on women and what they encounter in the workplace, how challenges they might encounter are different, and that's really resulted in our book, Shift into Thrive, how we, the strategies that can really help women deal with some of the different challenges that they do encounter in the workplace. So I have a real passion for that, not only from women I've worked with and the experiences I've seen with them, but my own personal experiences in the workplace that I've encountered, especially as I've worked my way up the corporate ladder, if you will. And then also just focusing on my own resiliency. In 2016, I actually gave myself a year sabbatical, took some time, wrote this book, but left the United States with just a suitcase and spent the year in Europe just to, like I said, build my own resiliency, bring back some creativity, and be able to take a fresh look at things. So the topic's very important to me, and I've had my own experiences in that area. So I'll turn it over to Kevin to talk about his interests.
That's great. Thanks, Lynn. So nice to meet everybody, and it's great to reconnect with NASN. What a wonderful organization of your impact and the reach you all have. My passion for the topic, I came out of really focusing on the resiliency part, and so I studied, I spent quite a bit of my professional life focused on building resiliency in people. My own dissertation, I focused on people that experienced, or managers in New Orleans that experienced Hurricane Katrina, and looked at how leaders emerged in the midst of really chaotic situations. A lot of the people I interviewed were actually in healthcare, hospital organizations in New Orleans. And so I've always been intrigued why, when faced with adversity, some people thrive and others, in essence, don't. They go actually the opposite direction. So I had the opportunity to partner with Lynn. We knew each other and working on our doctoral programs, and finished that and came out and decided to collaborate, that it was a good mix in terms of focus. I also do quite a bit of work coaching executive women, and oftentimes resiliency comes up as a significant issue as women work their way up in the organization. And so it's a real important topic, I think, more than ever. So that's a little bit about me. So I wanted to just go through, give you a little bit of a sense about what we're going to do today. In terms of our focus, we've got an hour to, in essence, give you a little wine tasting on resiliency and what it may mean for you as school nurses and your own challenges, but give you some introductory, just some concepts of what career derailment or resiliency and what thriving means. We'll then go through each of the resiliency strategies that Lynn and I developed through the research that we did. We'll invite you to do, self-assessment and really hone in on one resiliency strategy. And I think because we're, just starting the school year off, to me, for both of us, we really hope that you'll find one that you can work with that's going to really help you sustain your resiliency in light of the challenges that you have in front of you. And then talk or think through a little bit about how you can move it into action. So that's the intent today. And we'll be, in terms of providing input to us, we'll be asking you throughout the session to type in the question box, which you'll see on your panel on the right-hand side. So it'll be available to you. So that's our overall objectives. And then a bit in terms of our agenda, we'll start a little bit just understanding what you face as a school nurse, some of the challenges that really call forth the need for resiliency. And then Lynn will touch upon looking at the broader challenges that women face in the workplace and what led us to really hone in on that. We'll then talk about some key concepts, introduce the strategy, a short case study, and then your next steps. Where are you going to go from here? And we hope that you'll find some actionable, ways to move forward in terms of taking action as it relates to building your own resiliency. So that's where we're going today. And I wanted to start off with just at the highest level. I found this really interesting quote from a woman who is on the faculty at the Capstone College of Nursing, but she talked about in a journal article recently about, really is an imperative for nurses, and I would hypothesize that for school nurses it's even more important, given the realities that you all face in your own jobs and your organizations and schools that you work in. But we'd like to hear from you, and so we're curious, what kind of challenges do you face in your role for which there really is a compelling need to be resilient? And so if you'd be willing to type in the question box, again on the right hand of the screen, what are some of the challenges that you face in your role as a school nurse for which having resiliency or a really strong sense of resiliency would be really critical? So we'll take just a minute. Those will show up on our instructor box here, and we'll weave through those. Lynn and I will take a look at them, and we'll share some of the major ones. So go ahead on the right-hand side of your screen, in the control box, and type in what are the kinds of challenges that you're faced with as a school nurse that are really critical. Okay, it looks like I wonder if people are having problems typing in their questions. Are there challenges? Shanna, do you have any sense of what, is there a...
Hi, Kevin. The questions are rolling in.
Okay.
I hope...
yeah, I see about 15 questions so far, comments so far.
Okay.
Things like lack of support has showed up in several places where the individual is either the only person located and doing the nursing role, or not feeling supported by administration and the teachers or the parents. That comes up quite a bit on the list. The relationship with the parents comes up quite a bit. How do you get the word out to them? How do you work with them when their perspective is very different? Dealing with the family issues is a big, significant amount of comments about that I see.
I also see large numbers of students and staff.
So it sounds like it's the demands in terms of the volume that you're pulled so many different directions, which is where that's huge in terms of how can you respond to it all. And of course, as school nurses, you're committed to in terms of supporting the mission and really supporting people. Yeah, anything else jump out? Anything you notice, Lynn?
Just the immediacy, having, when the job that the nurses are doing, I mean, it's something that has to be taken care of immediately. So the immediacy of and the urgency of what they're often dealing with seems to be a big one. Feeling a lack of control over the whole situation.
Okay, good. So we've got a representative sense in terms of some of the challenges you all face I think at this point, Lynn, do you want to take it from here, and we'll talk a little bit about the broader perspective in terms of some of the challenges or dynamics that women face more specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. So really gets down to why the focus on resiliency, why women, and why now. There's a lot going on out in the literature, in the books that are coming out at the moment, articles in just all the magazines, but a big focus on a nice, really very positive resurgence of a focus on women, women's experiences in the workplace, and actually a lot on resiliency and how that ties to and the importance of that. Some research showing that resiliency is actually considered the #1 capability that women need to be successful in the 21st century, because they're just up against so many different situations. But this talks about women being underrepresented in the workforce in every country, in every age group, and yet the available talent pool continues to grow. The women graduating from college and actually graduating with both undergrad and master's degree is, for the master's degree, growing over 50%. That's women. So there's a pool, but the representation is not as high as the pool. The gap between wages, some statistics show and studies show it'll take 100 years to close. And after 2 years in the workplace, often women's aspirations drop by 60% and confidence by 50%. Reason being is that they don't often feel that the systems in place in the organization support them. When often many of these organizations, whether it's academia, whether it's corporate world, whatever it might be, were created, women weren't in the workplace. So they were created by men with policies and practices mainly centered on men. So women often don't find the environment accommodates them and their aspirations, and also having role models to focus on and have as mentors is low. And then gender diverse companies, but all the statistics show that if a company or an organization or a team is gender diverse, it's 15% more likely to outperform. So on one hand, you've got all the issues that women encounter in whatever place that they work, around things like unconscious bias, gender inequality, work-life integration, sexism. And then on the other hand, though, there's all the data that shows that if organizations and teams are diverse, they will outperform. So there's just a lot going on right now. Women are up against a lot of things that they always have been, but it's coming more to light, and resiliency has really surfaced as the key ingredient to help women overcome and be successful. Next slide, Kevin.
Okay.
So career derailment, there's going to be a series of key concepts we're going to focus on throughout this call in this webinar, and career derailment is one. And I actually did my research for my dissertation, which I completed in 2009, on women and career derailment. And I focused and interviewed women who were forced out, fired, or asked to resign from organizations where they'd gotten up pretty high in the organization, within at least 3 levels of the CEO of the organization. And the important concept here is that while a lot of organizations and companies that kind of sell solutions to this like to focus on the woman's leadership style as the main reason, it gets back to many of the reasons I mentioned on the other slide. It's really a systems issue. It's society and all of the society's expectations and perceptions of women, which start often even before we're born, right? You know, girls are pink, boys are blue. Girls have dolls, boys have trucks. Girls can cry, boys can't cry. I mean, all of that. So there's societal issues that we're up against. There's organizational issues that I had mentioned around businesses not being created for women, and a lot of the structures and policies and practices aren't supportive. There's other people's perceptions of strong women in the workplace, and that gets into some of what's called the double bind, of where if you are stronger and more assertive as a woman, oftentimes that's a double bind. You've got 2 counts against you because you're not acting as you should a woman normally should act, and you're also in a leadership role. And then there is the woman's capability. So there are leadership skills that women need to develop. They do need to make sure they get the right development. They do need to get out and network. So there are various things that we'll be looking at as we move forward that we do have control over that we need to focus on. Kevin, I'll turn it to you.
That's great. Thanks, Lynn. So I want to talk a little bit about resiliency because it's a term that's tossed around a lot, and I think getting a little bit of a definition would be helpful. The way we look at resiliency, it's a pretty naturally occurring phenomenon, but really is a process of coping. So how any of us cope with tough times, whether they're small or large, but it's also an outcome. So when we describe someone as being resilient, it indicates they're able to, in essence, navigate through tough times, maintain an even keel, and regain their balance in that regard. So it's both a coping process as well as an outcome. And it's not necessarily new. It's one of the early studies, actually, which is very relevant for school nurses in terms of resiliency, was the original studies back in the 50s that looked at children and resiliency among children and what were the factors that really contributed to it, which are going to be very consistent with some of the factors that are the resiliency strategies we have approached today. So really the idea is that we know that resilient people tend to be much more proactive. In other words, the more resilient we become, the more skilled we are at anticipating tough times and preparing for it, rather than simply reacting. But the idea of having those resiliency resources, those strategies in place, can both help you, in terms of regain your resiliency, but also adjust to those that come down the pike. So we can look at it from a proactive, reactive stance. Our position is really, I believe, it's really critical to, in essence, use the strategies we'll share with you so that you've got a baseline of resiliency so that when tough times happen, you can respond more powerfully to them. And, you know, it's inherently subjective what constitutes a large or small challenge. I know I've talked with some school nurses who do feel a sense of burnout, that if we do anything long enough, we tend to burn out, all the way up to some major shifts, for example, maybe budget cuts, or you've got a new boss, or some substantial things. So there's quite a range in terms of the kinds of challenges for which resiliency is really critical. And of course, whether something's large or small in terms of a challenge is inherently subjective. But what we do know is that the more resilient people become, they're more able to reframe challenges into opportunities for growth. In other words, by framing a challenge as a growth potential, 9 times out of 10 we tend to grow from it. So we get stronger, we grow, we adapt more, and we can better handle future challenges that come up. So it really becomes a big part of that, which is the more resiliency. It's a recursive process of we become more skilled at handling future challenges. And then as Lynn alluded to, you know, our emphasis, of course, in the work we did and the book that we wrote was toward women, but we know that these strategies also apply to men. I use these quite a bit in terms of the work I do, and also with men in terms of coaching clients. The reality is that, and you all live this, there are different contextual challenges that are inherent for women that we as men don't face. And so part of one of the emphasis why we focus on this, because there are some uniquenesses that women experience that men don't, in terms of, especially in their context. So anything you want to add, Lynn, in terms of our definitions before we continue?
No, I think that's a good foundation.
Okay, great. Awesome. So let's continue.
All right, thanks, Kevin. So before we talk about the 6 strategies, we'd like you to take a self-assessment, and this is where we're going to use the Raise Your Hand tool. So I'm going to describe each of these one at a time, and then I'm going to ask you if you feel the statement is true, to raise your hand. So if you agree with the statement, raise your hand. So we'll do them one at a time, and then when we're done, I'll clear the hands and we'll go to the next one. So the first one is, I have the breadth and depth I need in my network to get support during challenging times at work. The important thing here is you can't say this is true unless you believe you have both the breadth and depth. Breadth means that you have a large network. Oftentimes it's broad professionally, it's broad based upon your interest. It could mean being part of professional organizations, involved in things to do with hobbies. It could be work-related or not, but you've got a large amount of breadth so that there's people that you can call on, you can talk to as you want to explore other options or things that might be going on in your profession. Depth means that you've got people, and it doesn't have to be a lot of people, but you've got some people that that you're very close to who, when you encounter those difficulties as you listed at work, you could actually sit and talk to them about that. Not necessarily, maybe you're not looking for advice, but at least there's people who will listen and that you're able to get support in that way. So raise your hand if you feel you have both the breadth and depth that you need in your network to get the support you need. And if you just raise your hand now. Okay, so Kevin, do you have a kind of an approximate count on that?
Yep, we've got about 25 of the, looks like we have 83 attendees.
Okay, great. So about 25 of you answered this one that it's true. So then the rest of you did not. So so just remember that as we go through the rest of the assessment, where you did and didn't raise your hand. So I will clear your hands from this one, and we'll go to the next. Number 2, I am clear on my values, passions, vision, and goals for my career. Career can be defined a lot of ways. Career doesn't mean means that you have to have an interest in going up any sort of career ladder. You may be very happy in the job that you're in at this time. Obviously, it may mean being the best that you can be at that job that you currently do. So however you are defining career, wherever you are in your career, that's how that word's defined. But what it is saying is that you've given time recently to think about what your values are, what's important to you, what you're passionate about doing, and you've actually got a vision and goals for whatever that career is that you're interested in. So raise your hand if you believe that one is true, that you are clear, you've spent time recently to really visit and outline your values, passions, vision, and goals for your career. Go ahead and raise your hand.
Okay, we've got about 35 hands raised.
Okay, great. So 35 of you believe that you have done that recently. You have, and if you didn't raise your hand on that one, just remember that, and I'll clear and go to the next. I am getting the development I need to grow and be successful at the work I do. So this is pretty straightforward. We never, to build resiliency, we need to continue to grow, continue to learn, continue to grow. And obviously it needs to be related, in this case, to the work that you do. Are you getting the development you need? So if you feel that this is true, please raise your hand. Okay, so.
Okay, we've got about 29.
Okay, great. So far the 3 questions, it's been kind of a little bit in the same range, from mid-20s to kind of mid-30s, so similar range. I'll go ahead and clear the hands on this one. Just remember if you raised your hand or not. Number 4, I'm able to focus on taking care of myself, including my physical, emotional, and spiritual needs. To be able to answer this one is true, you need to be doing and focusing on all 3 of those. Physical is defined in exercise, diet, and sleep, so that you are focusing on all of those and getting the right amount of exercise, focus on a good diet and getting enough sleep. Spiritual can be defined a lot of ways. It's however you define it, but it's really looking at time for you to pull away from, mentally, away from the day-to-day, and being able to kind of clear your mind, clear the clutter, and be able to open up and focus on kind of the broader your life in a broader context. That could be yoga, that could be meditation, that could be mindfulness, that could be religion, that could be any way that you describe spiritual. And then emotional is really, are you able to spend time on assessing your emotions, what your triggers might be, where you are at a particular time with your emotions, and are you able to assess those and focus on those? So raise your hand with this one if you are focusing on all three of those. Okay, Kevin, do you have a sense of that one?
Okay, let's get the number there. It looks like 21.
Okay, so a little fewer on that one, often because it is all three of those. That one sometimes brings in a lower number, but remember if you raised your hand or not. Number 5, I fully use, and I'll clear the hands on this one, I fully use my strengths in my job to achieve the career I want. So once again, as before, career is defined as however you define the career. It says the career you want. So what is the career you want? Which gets back to number 2, are you clear on your values, passions, visions? But are you using your strengths? And this is very important because I think, as you all probably realize, when you are using your strengths, when you're being able to do something that you're passionate about and you're doing it well because you're using your strengths, we're much more engaged, we're much more involved, we're much happier. So it's very important in our work to be able to use our strengths. So number 5, answer that if that's true for you by raising your hand, that you fully use your strengths in your job to achieve the career you want. And just raise your hand. Okay, Kevin, do you have a sense of this one?
Okay, let me get a count here. Looks like we're at 22.
Okay, so more in line with the number 4. That's just above 20. So I'll clear the hands, and this is the last one. Number 6, I am able to maximize the positive aspects of a challenge and not dwell on the negative. And so it's fairly normal when we have a challenge or something significant happens to us that is negative, that we may get caught initially. That's pretty normal. But what we're saying here is you're not caught in it for long, and you're able to look at it and see, what can I learn from this? How can I grow from this? And how can I not allow this to hook me and drag me down? So raise your hand for number 6 if you feel that that is true for you, that you're able to maximize the positive aspects of a challenge and not dwell on the negative. And go ahead and raise your hand. Okay. Kevin, you have a count on that?
Okay, let's see what we got here. 25.
Okay, so if you did not raise your hand on a number, which it looks like there's probably several, and it's fairly typical that you'll probably have several of the 6 that you didn't raise your hand on. That's something that you're going to want to consider working on as we move through this. These are all directly related to the 6 strategies. These 6 questions, there's one for each strategy, resiliency strategy. So if you did not raise your hand on an item, make sure that you make note right now on what that item was that you did not raise your hand on, because as we go through this, you're going to want to listen for ideas and suggestions on the ones that you did not raise your hand on, because those are the ones that you probably want to focus on initially working on to help build your resiliency further. So Kevin, you want to go to the next slide?
Okay, that's great, Lynn, thank you. So we want to go back to another reflection question. Again, you'll have an opportunity to type in the question box, but as you reflect on your past experiences facing tough times in your role as a school nurse, what do you think helped you be resilient and even potentially thrive or grow from it, not just survive the experience? So now would be a good time to type into the question box. Let's see what you think there. And Lynn, I seem to be having problems getting the questions to pop up here, so if you could summarize them, that'd be great.
Sure, absolutely. So, advice and mentors, support from other school nurses, supportive staff. So we're getting a lot of comments that involves other people helping the individuals on this call survive the experience. We've got some that focus on the spiritual aspects, several there, focusing on that resiliency strategy. Remembering what the purpose is, the purpose of the role, the purpose of the job, not personalizing, looking at it, kind of research, understanding why it's really happening, not taking it personally. So that gets kind of to the emotional aspects, strategies that we talked about. Reflective of self, that can also fit into some of the coping strategies that are involved with resiliency. Looking at the big picture, some of the positive aspects. So that's a summary of what we're seeing.
Great. So at this point, we'd like to introduce the Resiliency Framework. So this builds upon exactly what a lot of you all shared, but what we decided to do when we created this model was really look at what are really the key strategies. And I think a lot of what you suggested could be reflected here. So we heard a lot in terms of support networks. We'll go through each of these one at a time. But when it comes to building and sustaining your resiliency, this is a pretty complete model. So it may be that, for example, you're really strong in 4 of these areas, but there's a couple that you need to really invest some time and energy in building. But we also know there's some linkages between these different approaches. So for example, we know that people that have really strong support networks tend to do better in terms of how they cope, because one aspect of coping is knowing when to ask for help. Who can be there when you have a really tough day to remind you that you're competent and you know what you're doing? Or we know that, for example, when people clarify their purpose and have a compelling vision, it tends to build their strengths. They feel more powerful and more confident, more willing to assert themselves. So anyway, so these are really a menu of strategies that you can use at any given point to really focus on making sure that you've got, in essence, the internal resiliency resources to navigate. So this is a great time at the beginning of the school year to think, are there any areas that maybe are less strong for you building upon the assessment that you just did that you might want to invest some time and energy in focusing on? Before I move into the first strategy, Lynn, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think that's a good summary. It's not linear, it's not step by step, it's whichever one. That's why we took the assessment. It's, these link directly to those 6 questions. So the ones that you didn't raise your hand for, the ones that you want to start giving some thought to, is that what you should work on. Great,
thanks, Lynn. So we'll go through these one at a time, describe them, and give you an idea of how you would actually practice them. So let's start with support networks. So really when we talk about support networks, and Lynn mentioned this in the first assessment question, we're looking at both breadth and depth of your support network. And probably, I don't know, for about 10 years I learned to fly trapeze years ago. It's just one of those things that I wanted to learn. And in trapeze, what allows me to take huge risks is knowing there's a safety net, there's a net there to catch me. And I think in comparable ways, your support network acts like that there may be times you have to take risks, and knowing that there's a net there to catch you of people and support can really empower you. And again, we're looking at breadth, which is beyond the walls of your school that you may be working in or organization, but other organizations are looking across the spectrum of maybe within the profession or even the larger nursing profession. But we also need depth, which is the intimacy that comes out of some tight relationships, those people that know you really well, the people that, again, on the days you have a rough time, you can be totally transparent and honest with. So we really look at its breadth and depth. And really the way to think about this, the fact that all of you are affiliated with NASN is such a huge part of building breadth and perhaps even depth in terms of professional networks. And so we often as coaches really support people in growing in their professions and finding opportunities, or even I've worked even with other professional associations that have mentoring programs as a way to find the people that can support you best. And so NASN is a great way to build that. So that's strength and support networks. Let's move on and talk about our next one. I think, Lynn, you're going to take this one.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. So the next one is clarify purpose. And when I ask the question in the assessment, it is about, do you have an understanding of your values, passions, vision, mission, and goals? The intent is that if you do it, what it does is it boosts your sense of optimism, it aligns your behavior, and enables you to take action to move forward in the direction you want to go. What often happens to all of us, though, is that maybe we had this sense or this idea before we took our first job or second job or third job, but oftentimes what happens, we get into a job, we get kind of heads down, day to day, doing the work, and we don't pull back up and take a look at, are my values still aligned with what I'm doing? Am I able to really live my passions through what I'm doing? If not, do I need to have a hobby or a volunteer activity that really allows me to do things that align with my passions across the board? Have I really outlined the vision, mission, and goals for my career, as I said, whatever your career may be, however you're defining that, so that I am moving in the direction and growing in the direction I want to? So really key, an action that you can take around this that really kicks it off and starts it is to do a values assessment. We have one that we utilize in the book, but you can find them in many places, where there's a list of values, and we recommend that you select 5 and get really clear on those, and then ask yourself, is what I'm doing still aligned with my values? Our values can change. They can develop in many ways, just like we do, and our roles can change if our values didn't. So it's really important to always take some time to take a step back and look at that. Next slide, Kevin.
Okay.
The next one, the third strategy, is build self-awareness. The key here is to really become very aware of your thoughts and emotions and your development needs, as I mentioned. And the intent here is that if you are, it really helps improve your capacity to consciously manage your behavior. And so the key with this particular strategy is, have you taken the time to really think about what your development needs are, and have you gotten feedback? Have you asked for feedback from others about what what you do well and what maybe you should do differently? And what this can help you do is, once again, grow and develop, but also help you get a better handle on why you might do the things you do, what your triggers might be. Have you taken time to assess that, and how you can better handle some of those emotional aspects that can get in our way? An action that often helps with that is journaling. If you journal what's been happening with you, things that might have triggered you, and then really think about, okay, what might I need to do different next time? How might I behave differently next time? Because if you write it down, it really helps you get a sense of, is it recurring? How did I handle it? How do I want to handle it differently? So this is key. This is the third key strategy. Kevin, you want to go to the next?
Yep.
So strategy number, the fourth one, is enhance self-care. And this one, as I mentioned, is really looking at all 3 aspects: physical, emotional, and spiritual. And the intent, and I think as nurses, you certainly know this, is that if you have all of that, if you're physically well, emotionally well, and spiritually well, your energy is increased. And as mentioned earlier by Kevin, we talked a little bit about using the word inoculate. You're proactively inoculating yourself against stress. And so the key here is to really ask yourself, are you doing all 3 of these? If not, which is missing, and which do you want to focus on? And physical, as I mentioned, is diet, exercise, and sleep. And as you all know, there's just so much going on right now in the world around sleep research and the importance of that. The emotional is, how do you respond to things? What hooks you? How do you deal with things? How do you engage from an emotional perspective? And do negatives? How do negatives grab you, and do they hold you? And then, as I said, spiritual is however you want to define it: yoga, meditation, mindfulness, religious practices. And so, you know, obviously the physical actions here are pretty straightforward. There's so much out there on that. If that's an area, you know, there's lots on that, what to do. When it comes to spiritual, one of the activities that is being talked about a lot now, and there's a lot of apps out there that help with this as well, is mindfulness. And really that helps with both the spiritual and the emotional. Are you aware in the moment of how you're feeling and responding, and really being able to stop in time and not react, but proactively manage your responses through being mindful. And so that's the strategy of enhanced self-care. And Kevin, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, thanks, Lynn. The fifth strategy is Actualize Strengths, and so the concept is how can you maximize your strengths to build confidence, but it's also about taking courage, gaining courage, which then helps you create better results. And so the challenge is that, you know, the times that we stumble and we're challenged with you know, big scary things in our work or wherever, we often tend to forget our strengths. And sometimes even I've seen clients that even to the point of feeling very victim-like. And so really it's about how do you step back into your own power, figure out what creates power for you in a sense of confidence. One thing that I've had people do is go back and look at peak experience in their lives. In other words, go back and do a timeline perhaps of your life and think about when were you at your very best? When did it flow? When were you having impact? When were, you know, the kinds of students you're dealing with in certain situations, whatever. And go back and look at that in terms of take an appreciative look to figure out what are the key ingredients of, you know, your strengths and when you felt most powerful and alive. Because again, there may be instances that when we forget that. And in fact, I keep in my journal a list of situations that I didn't think I could handle, but I did. I overcame them, whether it was finishing the PhD or running a marathon. But what were the resources comparable to what we asked you early in the poll about navigating? So that's the concept of Actualize, or the strategy of actualizing strengths. And then our last strategy, we know that resilient people are skillful in how they cope with tough times, and it doesn't trip them up. And so when we talk about broadening coping skills, we're thinking about how can you add to your list of tools to cope with tough times and make choices that help you grow and thrive versus simply surviving. And so we know that resilient people use a lot of different coping strategies, for example, problem solving, asking for help, getting a healthy perspective on things, which is how can you disengage from what's in front of you to get perspective. We think about it, it's almost, I use the analogy of trying to do work on a really messy desk. It's overwhelming because there's all these piles and papers. How on earth can we focus when in fact we've got that psychological clutter? And so maybe getting perspective on the challenge that you face is really a good way to move into action with this. Everything from getting a massage. I've had clients read about people who faced really tough times in their career and their lives and overcame it and came out stronger than ever. Very powerful thing. I'm a big believer in reading biographies, especially about those that have faced similar challenges. The other thing is visualization. I spend half of my time, I actually live in Palm Springs, and I'm a big fan of hiking the mountains. There's about 8,000 feet mountains right next to the town. And I'll go up there in the morning and watch the sunrise. And what I find is that when things get really tough and overwhelming, I often will visualize myself in the mountains with this pink and yellow light, an orange light on the mountains. And it allows me to get perspective on what's in front of me so that I can act more powerfully and move out of my emotions and more into a problem-solving mode. So that is broadening coping skills. And so let's advance. I'm going to talk just a minute about a case study to try to tie this all together, and then Lynn's going to challenge you all to think through in terms of which strategy you're going to want to focus on. Here we've got kind of an amalgamized case of different school nurses. We've got you know, Maria, who's in a large school, quite a long tenure in her profession, in her professional role, facing budget cuts, which, you know, for some of you is a harsh reality in terms of resources for school nursing, but yet expected to take on additional responsibilities. We've got Maria, who's struggling because she's not being included in specific discussions with administrators about the students that she serves. So in essence, losing her voice in terms of her role as a school nurse. And as a result, is feeling this sense of overwhelm and just isolation, frustration, really moving toward burnout. So maybe you all can identify with some of those attributes. Let's talk about how Maria could navigate this in terms of how she might move into action. Usually a good place to start is strengthening support networks, which is, in this case, for her to assess who's in my network now and who do I need in my network. In this case, maybe it's find a mentor who can help her through this, maybe help her rediscover her new balance and find her voice in terms of asserting herself. And I think finding new ways to get involved with NASN can be a huge part of the solution in terms of support networks. Secondly, I think going back and revisiting purpose. We all get into a profession with a sense of purpose or mission and vision, but sometimes we lose sight of that. And I think for Maria, going back and analyzing her values and her passions, revisiting her career vision, and maybe the idea of even updating her LinkedIn profile, which is kind of her professional identity or professional brand as a way to communicate to the world more about her purpose. And then lastly, a good strategy for Maria in this case might be to again go back and review and renew her sense of clarity about strengths and weaknesses. What does she do well? And maybe she's forgotten that. And out of that could come a really good development plan to move into action, which is how to use this as an opportunity to grow. Because 9 times out of 10, if we believe we're going to grow from something from it, we usually do. So that's a case of Maria. And Lynn, anything you want to add before we move on to the next section?
No, I think what you find as you begin to work on these, and I'm sure many of you are already working on some of these 6, you find that there are some connections, that they integrate often together, that working on one actually flows, the work on one flows into another. So that's something that I think you often find.
Great. Okay, so we've introduced all of the strategies, given you an example, and now it's time to take her from there. So Lynn, what want to go through our
thanks, Kevin. So you took the original assessment and raised your hand for the items that you did feel you were working on and were true for you. And so that narrowed it down to which ones didn't you raise your hand for. We walked through the strategies now. So now we want to get down to one. When you think about the ones that you should work on proactively to really help build your resiliency, want to narrow it to one. What's your top priority? So here are the 6. Some data to consider is what didn't you raise your hand to in the first assessment, and then as we went through the explanation, what really stood out for you as an area that if you worked on it, it would really help you build your resiliency and become stronger to deal with some of the challenges you deal with on your job that you chatted about earlier. So we're going to do a quick poll. You only respond to raise your hand to one of these. The one that you want to leave here to work on. So who's thinking about working on, will work on strength and support networks? Just raise your hand. Okay. Kevin, are you seeing any hands raised?
Let's see. This one we've got, well, we just got a couple hand raises, this one.
Okay. So I'm going to clear them then.
Okay.
And then how about clarify purpose? Who's going to work on that one to help build your resiliency? And please raise your hand.
Okay, so we've got 7 raise their hand for purpose.
Okay, I'll clear those. And how about build self-awareness? Who's going to select that one to work on to build your resiliency?
Okay, that's a big one. We've got 8 on that one.
Okay, great. And enhance self-care. And that could be physical, emotional, or spiritual, however you define that. Who's going to work on this one?
Big one, 20.
Okay, yeah, that's when you have the 3 items that often, it's hard for any of us, myself included, to not find something to work on there. How about, I'm going to clear the hands, how about Actualize Strengths? Who's going to be working on that one?
Okay, that one's got 4.
Okay. And last, Broaden coping skills. It certainly sounded like with your role that's an important one, but that may mean you're already focused on it too. So who's going to be working on this one? Just raise your hand.
Okay, we got 6 on that one, Lynn.
Okay, great. So the intent is, Kevin, if you want to go to the next slide. Okay. Thank you. The intent is that you identify a strategy, and certainly after this webinar there'll be time for you to think that through, and maybe you'll want to shift or take another one or work on another strategy. But you've identified a strategy. So in the question box, if you would please, what is your first next step? What is the first new action that you will take concerning that strategy you selected to intentionally build your resiliency? And if you just type that in the chat box, what is the first action that you're going to take? I think as we all know about goals, to have one is good, but to write it is even better as far as making it happen. To share it, you're even more likely to make it happen. To follow up on that, you're even more likely. So go ahead and share. Healthier diet, okay. I see, because we had quite a few pick the one on self-care, so I'm seeing a lot of actions that fall in alignment with self-care. Take a values assessment. That's incredibly helpful to just kind of kick off taking a look at clarifying your purpose before moving into vision. And it is. I mean, clarifying your purpose means oftentimes really taking a look at what you want to do next. When I took my year to think those things over, I mean, that plays a big role in it. There's oftentimes in our careers where we need to really think about what do we do next. Okay, Kevin, you want to go to the next slide? And if you would, you can keep chatting, keep typing your actions in the chat box. I'm just going to summarize the webinar, and we'll keep an eye on what your next action is as well in the chat box. But as far as the summary of what we went through, the fact that resiliency is critical to your career satisfaction and success, and it's so important to focus on it proactively. In order to prevent or lessen the impact of career challenges. You can certainly use the strategies reactively. I know I have. Difficulties have happened, and all of a sudden I need to focus on these strategies. But the more you can do it proactively, the better off you'll be. And the key is your choice. It's an intentional choice on how we all deal with difficulty, as you're aware. And so, are you making that choice? That intentional choice to really grow from what happens? And are you choosing to thrive versus simply survive? And the 6 strategies, they'll help you thrive. And as we mentioned, the framework isn't linear or sequential. You've selected the one that's most important to you to work on, and that is what's key. Kevin, you want to go to the next slide?
Okay.
So if you have any questions for us, feel free to type those in chat right now, because we do have a few minutes to deal with a couple of questions, to respond to a couple of questions. And Kevin, do you want to talk a little bit more about the other items on this last slide? Sure,
yep. We've got a list of online free resources for each of these resiliency strategies. And if you want to just go to, this is the website for our book site, and you can enter your email address, and then we'll email those out to you. But just free videos, resources, and all that may help you move into action. And then secondly, I'm going to be doing an article about school nurses and resiliency, and would love to talk with some of you who are interested in sharing your experiences and how you sustain your resiliency, building upon our conversation today. Just shoot me an email at the email address on the screen.
Okay, thank you. So I think we'll turn it back over to the moderator to wrap up.
Okay.
Sure, thank you. Did anyone have any questions that they wanted to type into the chat box? One of the questions that I wanted to ask was, you know, it seems like some of these may be harder than others, and did we go, because mine was also the self-care. Is that something that's easier for those to navigate towards it, so that's where we might start? Do you all know? Do you see that?
Yeah, well, yes, and I understand the question. I would say it's really going to depend on the individual. I've gone through these assessments several times, and the one that's selected most by the group is often different every time. So I think I wouldn't say that it's easier. In some cases, for a lot of people, it might even be more difficult. If you're already focusing on the others, it might be one that comes up, and especially with this role in particular, the nursing role, it might be very critical, important, but the time, it may be that it's been hard to find the time, and so making the times very important for it. Kevin, do you have something to add?
Yeah, you know, that's a good question. That's, I think, people do better, for example, if you want to build your, because fundamentally your psychological resilience rests upon your physical resilience, and if you feel like crud, it ain't going to happen. So I find that even finding people in your support network who also want to build more physical resilience is a great way to do it, because accountability is such an important part of taking action, and I always big about finding those people that, you know, in your school, your organization, who could do walks at lunch, who could, you know, again, be accountability for each other. To me, that's the opportune way to do it. But great question, Beth. Are there others?
I don't see any more coming up, and if they do, while I'm closing, we can bring them up. But, you know, I just wanted to thank you. I mean, truly, a hallmark of being a school nurse is prevention. And we do great planning for prevention for our students. And I think what you've given to us is a way for us to plan for ourselves, the prevention piece of it. So thank you so much. The other piece that I wanted to acknowledge was the support networks. And it is so true that the depth and breadth of our support, which is why I so appreciate what NASN has done for me. And I know that it really broadens my support network. And I noticed that someone also commented that the discussion list on NASN was part of their support network. So those of you that haven't, you know, can take advantage of that. So I certainly appreciate everything that you've done, and especially giving us an action item, one thing that we can choose to do and move forward. So thank you.
That's great. Absolutely, Beth. Great to work with you all and support such an awesome profession doing such important work. Any other thoughts, Lynn?
No, just thank you to everyone, and I wish you the best as you move forward on the action you selected. So thank you.
Okay, so seeing no more questions, I do want to thank all the participants as well for joining this webinar today. The webinar has been recorded, and all who attended today will receive an email tomorrow with a link to the recording and to the presentation handouts. I'm Beth Maddie, NASN President. Have a great day.